All right, I think our numbers have settled and we can go ahead and get started. This is Ruth Friedman. I'm the director of the Office of Child Care. I apologize for not being on camera today. I'm actually out sick, so with apologies for the blank screen, but I'm really pleased to be here today with you all to kick off this webinar. The Biden-Harris administration is committed to creating partnerships with tribal nations that appropriately honor the nation-to-nation relationship. And OCC's recently published formal request for information focusing on childcare requirements, regulations, and processes for tribal nations that administer a CCDF program is part of our effort to do that. We have heard many concerns about the ways in which current CCDF rules fail to meet the individual needs of tribal nations and fail to properly account for tribal sovereignty. So just for example, OCC has heard concerns about how the minimum set aside for direct services spending, which is a minimum of 70%, and is intended to make sure that CCDF is mainly spent on helping parents afford childcare. But we understand that this requirement has caused a barrier for some tribal nations to make needed childcare system investments that, if unaddressed, may limit families' ability to use childcare assistance. That's just one of many examples of the sort of feedback that we have heard from you all. And what we are aiming to do with this request for information is we've included over 20 topics that we are seeking comment on, as well as just broadly, we welcome any feedback on any aspect of the Tribal CCDF program. But this provides a really important opportunity for extensive government-to-government dialogue, and I'm really excited about what can come out of this opportunity. Today is just the first of many opportunities to discuss the ways we can better support tribal nations implementing CCDF programs. You're going to hear later in this webinar about the consultation we have planned, as well as some listening engagement sessions. We are really, really eager to hear from tribes, both formally and informally, and we are happy to have follow-up conversations outside of this webinar in the future to discuss anything that you hear today. Before I hand off the rest of the webinar to all of our wonderful OCC staff, I do just want to highlight the folks who will be presenting with you today. I think you can move forward, the slide forward. There we go. So these are some of our many, many wonderful folks at the Office of Child Care who help support our tribal program, and they will be presenting for you here today. And with that, I'm going to hand it over.
Dr. Friedman?
Yeah.
So they're in the chat. Some people are saying they can't hear you.
Okay. I'm sorry to hear that. I'm gonna, I will put some remarks in the chat so that we can move forward with the actual content and we can move forward.
I just wanted to let you know.
Thanks, April.
Okay, thanks everybody. First, I'll just make sure that you can hear me okay. Sorry about that. And we can move to the next slide where I will go over our agenda. Okay, great. Seeing confirmation that you can hear. Excellent. So hi everybody, my name is Carly Champagne. I'm going to be providing an overview of our content for today, and then I'll introduce the RFI before handing it over to my colleagues to dive a little deeper into some of the components here. So today we'll cover what a request for information is, as well as the specific purpose of the tribal RFI. We'll also cover the key differences between an RFI and an NPRM, since we currently have both out for public comment at the same time. And then following the overview, we'll dive deeper into a subset of specific topics that we're asking for comment on in the RFI. Then we'll provide some specific instructions on where to find the RFI and related resources, as well as how to provide comments. And finally, we'll briefly go over the remaining timeline for the RFI process and preview some upcoming additional opportunities to learn about the RFI and provide feedback. So first, let's jump into what a request for information is. So an RFI is a formal process to gather your feedback, including through formal consultation. It is published in the Federal Register and can inform a variety of potential future policy guidance, which I'll touch on a bit more soon. But first, I'll briefly reiterate the purpose of the specific tribal RFI from OCC. Next slide, please. And yes, we will be posting these slides to our resource page for you all as well. So as Dr. Friedman mentioned, ACF and OCC are committed to supporting our government-to-government relationship with tribal nations, and know there are really important concerns that have been raised regarding the implementation of tribal child care programs. So we really intend to use the RFI to more comprehensively think about the Tribal CCDF program, policies, and processes. So next, we'll look at some of the key differences between this RFI and our NPRM.
It's all the
So it's a little unusual to have an NPRM and an RFI out at the same time. So we wanted to briefly walk through the differences between these two processes. And first, I'll just clarify what we mean by rulemaking. So when ACF wants to make changes to regulations, we issue a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, or NPRM, which is a public notice of proposed changes to federal regulations. So following a comment period, ACF then reviews the public comments and issues a final rule. And so for this NPRM, that's estimated to be issued in the spring of next year. So in terms of the differences here between the NPRM and the RFI, first is thinking about the scope. So the NPRM encompasses CCDF programs run by states, territories, and tribes, whereas this tribal RFI is really focused on the tribal CCDM program specifically. So both the NPRM and RFI get published in the Federal Register. They solicit official public feedback through regulations.gov, and any member of the public is welcome to comment. But importantly, they have very different deadlines. So the NPRM has 45 days for the public to submit comment, which is ending next Monday, August 28th. Whereas for the RFI, we have a much longer time for comment. We really want to give tribal nations maximum time to consider the questions we're asking, raise concerns, and propose solutions and ideas for the Tribal CCDF program. So the public comment period for the RFI is open now through January 2nd of 2024. We're also holding formal tribal consultations for both, but again on very different timelines. So the consultation for the NPRM was held on July 20th, which had to be within that 45-day comment period, and a consultation report for that consultation will be completed by September 5th. And the tribal RFI consultation will be held this November, November 29th to 30th, and we're also hosting some virtual sessions between now and then as well. So another key difference between the NPRM and RFI is that there are strict rules that really constrain our ability to talk about the NPRM to just what's directly addressed in it. Those constraints do not exist for the RFI, and so we're able to have more in-depth discussions in addition to the formal consultation. And lastly, you'll notice that the NPRM has a specific estimated release for the final rule, with revisions to the federal regulations, while the RFI could inform future rulemaking. So on the next slide, I'll explain a little bit more about the possible impacts of the RFI and what that looks like. So once we review the comments received through the RFI process, we may use the information to inform regulations through potential future rulemaking, for example, through an NPRM. But the RFI can also inform technical assistance resources, such as where to focus tailored or individualized support on tribal CCDF policies and programming. We do want to be transparent that any changes in policies requiring revisions to the regulations will require further processes to take effect, such as rulemaking procedures. And on the next slide, we'll provide some links on where to find the RFI itself, as well as some other resources. So here you can see we've shared links to where to find the RFI itself on regulations.gov to submit comments. We've also included a link to OCC's resource page for the RFI, which we'll be updating continuously with resources, and where you'll be able to find the slides and recording of this webinar soon after. And now I'm going to pass to my colleague, Sarah Stafford, who's going to start our more in-depth discussion of the RFI content, including some specific examples.
Great. Thank you, Carly. Good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Stafford, and I'm with the Office of Child Care. I'm a senior tribal specialist joining you from the traditional and contemporary lands of the Puyallup tribal people in Tacoma, Washington. So next, we're going to do a very high-level overview of the different content and topical areas that are included in the RFI. So on the next slide, you will see that the tribal RFI covers a great deal of the tribal CCDF program requirements, including components related to CCDF funding and administration, as well as ways to increase family access to childcare and build childcare supply in the workforce. You'll notice too that there is an other topic listed as well, and that's intentional because we want your comments regarding any component of the CCDF program that has impacted your tribal nation, lead agency, or community. And because we don't have the time today to go into detail on all of these topics, the areas that you see bolded on this slide are those that we'll dive into a little bit deeper and highlight some examples, including providing time for clarifying questions as those arise. We're also preparing video resources on the topical areas that we do not cover today, and then we will be posting those on the RFI resource page. Next slide. So the first topical area that we'll review together is related to funding allocations and tiered requirements and the corresponding sizes. So if you're a tribal lead agency, you're pretty familiar by now with the different allocation sizes that CCDF has for all tribal lead agencies and the respective tiered requirements that are tied to those. So these allocation sizes are designated as small, medium, and large, and they were established as a part of the preamble of the 2016 CCDF final rule and have remained unchanged since that time. And these thresholds, or these designations rather, are based on fiscal year 2016 funding. So you'll see tribes with small allocations receive under $250,000 based on their 2016 funding. Tribes with medium allocations receive between $250,000 and $1 million, and tribes with large allocations receive over $1 million. Next slide. And so on this slide, you will see what the allocation sizes mean in reference to the tiered allocations. And so you'll see tribes with large allocations are subject to the majority of CCDF requirements. However, they still have a list of exemptions, including the consumer education website, licensing requirements for child care providers, the requirement to conduct a market rate survey, and also for having a comprehensive training and professional development framework. While you'll notice for tribes with medium allocations have those same exemptions, however, they're also exempt from operating a certificate or voucher program. And then you'll notice that tribes with small allocations are subject to only some CCDF requirements. The majority of the applicable requirements reside within the health and safety topics, and there are even more exemptions for tribes with small allocations, including the same exemptions for medium and large allocations, but they are also exempt from offering direct services, and they are able to submit a abbreviated or shortened CCDF plan. So OCC has heard that only changing the funding range for each allocation size could cause a large and burdensome increase in applicable program requirements, while others have shared that some kind of update to the thresholds and or using the most recent funding amount should be explored. So on the next slide, given that the dollar thresholds and the corresponding tiered requirements have not changed since 2016, the Office of Child Care would like to know whether these two requirements for tribal nations for all allocation sizes are still appropriate. And if not, what kind of changes to either the dollar thresholds and or the tiered requirements for each size would better support the implementation of the CCDF program. So this is just one example of one topical area that's included within the RFI and the types of areas that we would like to explore further with tribal lead agencies, their nations, citizens, and impacted community members. So with that, I think we can go to the next slide and pause and see if there are any clarifying questions that we could answer at this time. And if anyone on the OCC or TCBC side wants to help me.
Yes, I do see a question, Sarah.
Okay.
So the question was, what was the criteria that guided OCC in determining these amounts in the first place?
That is a good question that I'm not certain of, that predates my time with the Office of Child Care. So I'll pause and see if anybody else from OCC has thoughts on this. If not, we can take it back and follow up.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Sorry. Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Campbell. I'm a child care policy supervisor, and I just wanted to jump in a little bit on that background in that there used to be different thresholds where for tribal nations receiving CCDF, it was split into two divisions up to where there were different requirements. And then in 2016, we created the 3 allocation settings. You can read a bit more about that in the preamble to the 2016, but I don't want us to spend too much time on this because I know there's a lot of information that we need to get through on the webinar. So I just wanted to point you all to that description there in the 2016 preamble that could help you out.
Thanks, Megan.
Are there any other questions?
Yes. We had a question from Kim. Is it because at one time tribes didn't receive as much funding? And another question, did COVID era funding move some tribes from one allocation size to another? Would the additional funding streams do this?
So I can expand a little bit on the second question. So funding allocation sizes were determined on fiscal year 2016 allocations only. So even if there have been yearly increases in annual regular CCDF funds and or one-time increases due to supplemental funds or COVID funds, that did not change a tribe's allocation size. So if you were to look at what a tribal nation received in 2016 compared to fiscal year 2023, you will see a substantial increase in funds. However, the allocation designation has not changed since 2016. Okay, I think we can move on to the next slide. So we are going to continue talking about spending requirements. CCDF regulations include 3 types of set-asides or designations for how funds must be spent. First, tribal lead agencies with medium and large allocations must spend at least 70% of their discretionary CCDF funds, excluding the $30,000 discretionary base amount, on direct services. The 70% minimum does not apply to tribal small allocations, as mentioned before, which are not required to spend funds on direct services. This minimum spending requirement ensures that CCDF is primarily used to help parents afford childcare. However, OCC has heard concerns that this can be a barrier for some tribal nations to make needed childcare system investments that, if unaddressed, actually limit a family's ability to use childcare assistance. Second, all tribal lead agencies, regardless of allocation size, have a 15% cap on administrative expenditures, except for the funds that are designated as a part of the $30,000 discretionary base. We have heard a lot of feedback from many tribal nations that the administrative costs far exceed 15% of funds allocated or expended. So we are interested in hearing more about what the impacts have been around this spending requirement or limitation. And third, CCDF requires that all lead agencies spend no less than 9% of their total CCDF expenditures on quality improvement activities. Tribes with medium and large allocations are also required to spend an additional 3% on infant and toddler quality improvement. So while all tribal lead agencies can spend more than 9% of their funds on quality activities do not count towards the 70% direct services requirement for medium and large size allocations. So therefore, there is a limit to how much those with those allocation sizes can spend on quality, which we understand fund critical indigenous language and cultural revitalization efforts, amongst other innovative practices for children in care. So next slide. The Office of Child Care is interested in understanding how any of those 3 spending requirements inhibit opportunities and or access to child care services within your tribal nations, and in what ways, if so. And then also curious to hear what other alternative policies or proposals would better meet the needs of children in care within tribal nations and communities. Okay. We can go to the next slide and see if there are any, actually, I'm sorry. We are going to now shift to our last spending topic requirement, and I'm going to pass this to Lisa Fergus.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Fergus, and I am also a senior tribal program specialist in the Office of Child Care. I want to share some information with you related to construction and major renovation requirements. The CCDF regulations specify that tribal lead agencies, including those who have consolidated their CCDF program into their Public Law 102477, may use the funds for construction or major renovation of child care facilities. Tribes or tribal lead agencies must first request and receive approval before using the CCDF funds for construction or major renovation purposes. It must also be demonstrated that adequate facilities are not otherwise available, and that after a project is completed, whether that be a major renovation or construction, the level of services increases or the quality of services improves. Tribal nations have identified a need for investments in facilities and allocating funds for construction or redesigning existing spaces. It's critical for meaningful service delivery to meet the specific care and early education needs of tribal nations. We've heard that the process for applying and receiving approval for facility projects is cumbersome. Tribal nations have requested for the application process to be simplified or streamlined, and this is also the case for joint funded or shared projects. So we're particularly interested in if there are certain parts of the process or the existing application requirements that are challenging and that you would also like for OCC to address. Next slide, please. Just as the other content areas, we wanted to take a moment to highlight a few of the questions that we have included within the RFI, as well as looking at some additional questions that may warrant comments or need revisions. OCC would like to know if the construction renovations requirements inhibit opportunities or create barriers to constructing or renovating facilities for tribal nations. If you're experiencing that, or if you have some specific examples, we would like to know in what ways that is impacting your program. We'd also like to know if there are alternative policies or requirements that would better meet tribal nations' childcare and early care facilities. We look forward to hearing more about how the current requirements and funding used for these projects impacts your tribal nations. Next slide, please. We'll pause for a moment to see if there are any questions, either in the chat or that you would like for us to address at a later time. Okay. Now I am going to turn it over to Rachel to continue to share some of the topical areas.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Rachel McKinnon. I am a senior policy specialist here in the Office of Child Care. And we wanted to delve a little deeper into the eligibility requirements. So eligibility is one of those areas that there are different requirements depending on tribal nations' allocation size. So for tribal nations with small allocations, an eligible child could be any child who meets the definition of Indian child and resides in the service area. And both of those pieces are defined in the CCDF plan. And in addition, tribes with small allocations can use categorical eligibility. This means that any child would be eligible who lives within, who meets those two requirements. For tribes with medium or small allocations, a child who's eligible needs to meet the requirements of both the definition of Indian child and one who resides in the service area, but also needs to meet the other eligibility requirements for CCDF. So that includes being under the age of 13, living with a family who has an income under 85% of the grantee median income, parents who are working, attending a job training or educational program, or is in need of protective services. These tribal nations with medium and large allocations also have the option of implementing a policy of categorical eligibility if they show in their CCDF plan that their tribal median income is less than 85% of the SMI. So that means in every triennial tribal CCDF plan, one of these tribal nations with medium or large allocations would need to show that they meet this requirement of being less than 85% of SMI. So if we go to the next slide, the Office of Child Care wants to know more about whether these requirements that differ depending on the size of a tribal nation's allocation is really the best fit. So are these current eligibility requirements for families appropriate for all the allocation sizes? We've heard that maybe categorical eligibility should be allowable for all tribal nations, regardless of their allocation size. That all tribal CCDF programs should be able to provide services to all children that meet the Indian child definition and live within the service area. There may also be other requirements that tribal nations would like to see adjusted for the eligibility requirements that might better fit tribal communities. So these are some areas that we want to hear from you about, or any other issues around eligibility that folks haven't told us about yet. And so if we go to the next slide, we're open to hear any questions that folks might have to clarify these eligibility requirements or the kind of information that we might be looking for. Right, well, I don't see any questions coming in through the chat. So I will turn it over to my colleague, Meryl.
Thank you, Rachel. Hello, everyone. My name is Meryl Borowski, and I'm a Senior Tribal Program Specialist in our central office. And I am going to talk about background checks. So CCDF regulations require that tribes comply with the same background check provisions as states and territories. But the Act does not provide tribes with the legal authority to conduct all checks, and tribes face unique challenges directly requesting and accessing certain data. This lack of statutory authority and access to conduct certain checks impacts public safety, not only in tribal communities, but across the United States. Next slide. We are seeking comment to better understand the unique challenges tribal nations face in implementation of comprehensive background checks, as well as recommendations for addressing these challenges while ensuring child safety. We've heard that delays in processing background check results have impacted hiring staff in a timely manner. We've also heard that for some very remote tribal nations, such as those in Alaska, it's extremely difficult to conduct fingerprints because of the lack of available locations to get fingerprints. We've also heard of the many challenges in conducting interstate checks, including the time it takes to establish processes and inability to share data, just as a few examples. Would like to hear from you more about the types of challenges you are experiencing, as well as any suggestions you may have that will improve and ensure child safety. So if we go to the next slide, we can pause for any questions. So we have a question in the chat. It says, how do you propose to make background checks easier? And so what we're asking is from you all is to propose to us to provide recommendations to make the process easier. What are some sticking points or certain challenges? We really want to hear from you all to hear your suggestions. And then OCC will take that information and see what changes, if any, you're able to make.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, this is Tammy Wickstrom from the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. So one of the challenges is in accessing some data for background checks, the states use their DHS system or the Health and Human Services system in the state, and the tribes often don't have access to that system. So if there could be a tribal DHS system, or if there could be a negotiation for tribes to be able to access those systems, that would maybe help or improve the background check process.
Any other background check questions?
So please continue to add any comments on all of the sections in the chat, but I'm going to hand it over to my colleague.
Thanks, Meryl. So we wanted to provide some specific guidance for submitting comments that will really help us to fully address your feedback and the specific components of CCDF policies and processes that it might apply to. So when you are submitting comments in regulations.gov, at minimum, please make sure to include the agency, which is ACF, as well as the docket number, which is also bolded here. In addition, if possible, we ask that you include some of the additional information listed here. So the relevant topic, for example, using the letters for each section. So in the top right part of the slide, you'll notice the previous slide that gives you an overview of all the RFI components has letters and numbers with each of those items. And those refer directly to each of those topic areas within the text of the RFI. So when you're giving an example, you'll see at the bottom of the slide, there's an example there referring to A1, which is specific to the tribal child count. So using those just really helps us quickly identify what your feedback is related to and helps us really address it specifically and in depth to the extent that we can. And then lastly, I'll note that you can also submit feedback to OCC's tribal mailbox, which is noted there at the top of the slide in the first bullet. Please note that any comments, whether they're submitted through regulations.gov or through the tribal mailbox, will be posted publicly. So please don't include any identifying information that you don't want posted publicly. And also note that you can submit comments anonymously if you'd like by just entering NA in the relevant fields. I also want to just say a reminder for tribal leaders in particular, if you do give testimony during tribal consultation, you don't need to submit that twice. That will be included as part of the public comment in regulations.gov. So next we'll give you a sense of kind of where we are and where we're headed in this process. So of course, the RFI is published and we've sent out a variety of announcements related to that. We also shared some links with you earlier on how to access the RFI text and provide comments. And we'll be uploading these slides as well as the recording and a fact sheet to the resource page soon after this webinar. We'll also be holding 2 virtual listening sessions, one in September and one in October, which will be more tailored to specific audiences impacted by tribal CCDF policies and processes. So more specifically on September 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we'll be holding a session for tribal nations and tribal lead agencies specifically. And then on October 25th at 9 p.m. Eastern Time for families and childcare providers specifically, who we know are more likely to be available after work hours and trying to accommodate across time zones, which is why we have that later time for the East Coast. And given that this is a very detailed and comprehensive RFI, we just want to emphasize that these listening sessions will provide these additional dedicated opportunities for discussion, questions, and feedback outside of the webinar today. And we'll really have some more extended time at that time for questions and discussion. So those sessions will be 90 minutes. We'll also be holding in-person tribal consultation, as we mentioned, in late November in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And we'll be sharing more additional details on that very soon. And lastly, as we mentioned, the public comment period is open now through January 2nd, 2024. So we'll take a pause here. I see some questions have come through in the chat. So we have one related to background checks in relation to being charged in tribal court, state court, federal court databases, and that they're not being connected when doing background.
So for this particular question, we really encourage you to submit that as a comment. So if the comment is that charges, while not convictions, are not kind of counted in the background check process, then that would be something that we would encourage you to submit it as a comment, and we can review it once the RFI.
Thanks, Meryl. I also see a comment or question here from Sarah. Our tribe utilizes PL 101-630 level background checks, which are deep and expensive for our TLA childcare employees, but we found that it wasn't easily explained when submitting our plan, and there was a lot of confusion surrounding it from our regional experts. It would be really nice if those types of checks were acknowledged in the background checks portion of the plan. So I think similar here, where that's really excellent feedback and information for us to know. And we would really encourage you to submit that as a public comment in regulations.gov. Thanks so much for that feedback.
And can I just add to that, Carly, that I think also any comment, this is a good example of like a change to the plan, which our grantees just submitted last January and were just recently approved. So if you know, any of your comments are related to changes for how plan questions or not being clear like this comment, those are definitely welcome as well. And so that's a really good example of another type of comment and a potential change.
Thanks, Meryl. Absolutely. I'll also say, if anyone has questions on any of the content covered today, feel free to put those in the chat now as well. And I'll just note that if there are any questions that are outside the scope of our discussion today, we'll take those back as a team and do our best to address those in upcoming resources, such as frequently asked questions. Okay, so not seeing any additional questions at this time. Yes, Roxanne. So in terms of the PowerPoint slides and the recording from today, as well as an upcoming fact sheet, those will be posted on the RFI resource page, which is in the slides and in the chat here as well. And those will be coming very soon after the webinar on that resource page. We'll be able to find them publicly there. I see one more question here coming in from Anne. So we are out in remote Alaska. We've struggled with the background check requirements. Currently in our plan, we do name checks immediately until we can fly them into the hub community to get their prints rolled. There is no way we can comply with printing all the members residing in child care providers' homes. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Anne. I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of being in a remote area and experiencing those challenges. And I'm sure that's the case for other folks as well. I think I would echo our guidance before in terms of submitting that specifically as a public comment. I think that's really good information for us to know and file in terms of the background check requirements. Well, thank you all so much for your time today and for joining us. We really look forward to your ongoing feedback and partnership, and be on the lookout for some registration links for our virtual sessions coming up in September, October, and then consultation in November. Thanks again so much.